I never thought I'd say this, but my uncle might be the reason I'm still single. And it all started with a camping trip that was supposed to be a chill weekend getaway in the woods. I mean, I like camping as much as the next guy. But when your 28-year-old uncle decides to treat a weekend in nature like it's spring break in Cancun, things get complicated. So here's the setup. My Uncle Greg has always been this larger-than-life character in my life. He's loud, goofy, and has this way of making any situation ridiculous but somehow fun. Growing up, he was the cool relative who'd slip me some candy when my parents weren't looking, or let me stay up past my bedtime watching old movies. But as I got older, especially after coming out, things between us shifted a bit. Greg was always supportive, but also the kind of guy who never quite adjusted his vibe. Like, he'd still crack jokes that were borderline inappropriate, or make these offhand comments that made me roll my eyes. Not in a mean way, more like Uncle Greg being Uncle Greg kind of way. Anyway, when he invited me on this camping trip, I figured it'd be a good chance to hang out, get away from the city noise, and maybe reconnect. Plus, he promised it wouldn't be too rough. He even said there'd be a hot tub. A hot tub at a campsite? My curiosity was officially piqued. The campsite was about 3 hours from the city, deep in this forested area with lots of trails and a lake. When we arrived, I immediately noticed that Greg's version of roughing it involved more creature comforts than actual camping gear. There was a big tent, yeah, but also a portable grill, a Bluetooth speaker blasting 80s rock, and, as promised, a fancy inflatable hot tub set up near the water. I was half impressed, half questioning if this was really camping or just glamping with a side of wilderness. The whole first day was pretty laid back. We cooked burgers, swapped stories around a fire pit, and I started to realize how much I'd missed hanging out with him. Greg was his usual loud, unapologetically himself, but there was this unexpected softness too. Like, he genuinely wanted to know what was going on in my life, and wasn't just surface level. It was refreshing. Then came nightfall, and that's when things started to get interesting. After a few beers and some late-night hot tub soaking, Greg got a bit too comfortable. I mean, let's talk about feelings and life choices. Comfortable. It caught me off guard because I'd never really seen that side of him. Usually, he's the guy cracking jokes and deflecting anything serious. But here he was, opening up about his own struggles, his past relationships, and, surprisingly, his thoughts about love. I wasn't expecting any of that. And just when I thought I had him figured out, he made this offhand remark that left me wondering if there was more going on beneath the surface. Suddenly, this trip felt less like a simple escape and more like the start of something complicated. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to handle. And honestly, I'm still not sure if I am. But that night, with the stars overhead and the heat from the tub swirling around us, I realized this trip was going to change a lot more than just my camping plans. I remember leaning back against the edge of the hot tub, the warm water swirling around my shoulders, the crisp night air brushing over my damp skin. Greg was sitting beside me, hunched over a bit, staring into the dark lake like it held all the answers. For a moment, there was this silence between us. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that makes you realize there's something important about to be said. "Look, man," he started, voice low. "I know I've always been the fun uncle, the guy who jokes around and never takes anything seriously. But truth is, I've been lonely. More than I let on." He ran a hand through his hair, then smiled sheepishly. "It's weird, right? A guy like me, in his 40s, admitting that?" I nodded, not sure what to say. Greg wasn't usually the type to get vulnerable, and here he was, spilling parts of himself I'd never seen before. "I guess I'm just tired of pretending everything's fine," he added. "I've had relationships, yeah, but nothing that really stuck. I think part of me is scared of being hurt, scared of opening up. But watching you out here, being so honest about who you are, it's got me thinking." He glanced at me, eyes a little softer than usual. "You're lucky, you know, to be this open. I admire that, even if I don't always show it right." I swallowed hard, heart starting to race, for reasons I couldn't quite explain. Part of me wanted to brush it off as just a moment of drunken sentimentality, but something in the way he looked at me made me think this wasn't just empty words. I don't know what to say, I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. It's kind of amazing hearing that from you, Greg chuckled nervously. Yeah, well, this isn't exactly me in my comfort zone, but hey, if we're being honest, I kind of hoped we could talk about stuff like this. I wanted to get closer. Closer. The word hung between us, heavier than the night air. For the next hour, we drifted between talking about life, love, and fears that neither of us had shared with anyone else. Greg told me about his last breakup, how he felt like he'd lost a part of himself when things ended, and how he'd buried those feelings under jokes and distractions ever since. I told him about my own struggles, finding acceptance, navigating relationships as a gay man, and the loneliness that sometimes feels suffocating. By the time we finally climbed out of the hot tub, it felt like something had shifted. The easygoing dynamic we'd always had was still there, but underneath it was something new, something more real. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of birds chirping. Greg was already up, sitting by the campfire with a mug in hand, wearing his signature grin. "Morning, kiddo," he said, nodding my way. "Sleep well? Better than expected," I replied, stretching. "You?" Like a rock. Nothing like fresh air and bad coffee to set the day right. We spent the day hiking a trail that led to a waterfall about an hour from the campsite. Greg was in his element, pointing out weird-shaped trees, telling me stories about the area, and occasionally straying off the path to check out some rock or bird or whatever caught his eye. I couldn't help but admire how freely he moved through the woods, like he belonged there. At one point, we sat on a large flat rock near the falls, the water crashing down nearby, the mist cool on our faces. Greg turned to me with that same open expression from the night before. "You know," he said, "I've always thought of you as my nephew, my kid brother in a way. But lately, I'm not sure that's the whole story." I raised an eyebrow, heart skipping. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying not to sound too eager. He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I mean, sometimes I catch myself thinking about you in a way that's more than family. I didn't expect it, and I don't want to freak you out or mess things up. But I figured I owed you the truth." His words hit me like a wave. It was the last thing I expected from Greg, but somehow it made a strange kind of sense. The honesty, the closeness, the way he looked at me when he thought no one was paying attention. For a moment, I just sat there, processing. Then I looked at him and smiled, a little nervously. "I'm glad you told me," because I felt the same way, but I didn't know how to say it. Greg's grin widened, relief washing over his face. "Guess this camping trip turned into something way more than just a weekend getaway, huh?" I laughed, the sound echoing over the waterfall. In that moment, surrounded by nature and the hum of the forest, everything felt possible. Like maybe, just maybe, this unexpected connection could lead somewhere real. But as the sun started to dip behind the trees and we made our way back to camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a complicated story, one that would test everything I thought I knew about family, love, and the blurry lines in between. The walk back to camp was quieter, but not in an awkward way. It felt like both of us were still riding that wave of honesty, each step making the whole situation feel a little more real. I kept stealing glances at Greg, noticing details I'd never really paid attention to before. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the slight crease near his mouth when he was thinking about something, that easy confidence he carried even when he was being vulnerable. When we got back, the campfire was still warm, and the sun was just touching the horizon with shades of pink and orange. Greg pulled out a couple beers from the cooler and handed me one. "Two surprises," he said, clinking his bottle against mine. I smiled, and to being honest, we sank into the worn camping chairs, the silence between us now comfortable instead of tense. After a few sips, Greg cleared his throat and looked at me sideways. "So what do we do now?" he asked. "I mean, we just admitted we have feelings. That's not exactly your everyday camping conversation." I laughed. "Yeah, especially with you. I don't think anyone would expect Uncle Greg to get all romantic in the woods. Hey, I'm full of surprises," he teased, then got serious again. "But seriously, I don't want this to mess up what we already have. Family comes first, right? I nodded. Definitely. But maybe family can mean more than just what we thought it did. Greg's smile flickered, a bit unsure. Are you saying you want to see where this goes? I took a deep breath. I think I do. For the rest of the evening, we talked about what that might look like. We agreed to take things slow, no pressure, and to be honest with each other every step of the way. It felt like uncharted territory, but for once, that didn't scare me. The next morning, things were different but still familiar. Greg woke up early and brewed coffee over the fire, just like the day before, but now there was a quiet anticipation between us, an unspoken question of what today would bring. We decided to spend the day exploring the lake. Greg rented a small rowboat from a nearby dock, and we paddled out into the calm water. The sun was warm, and the lake was like glass, reflecting the sky and trees perfectly. We didn't talk much at first, just enjoyed the peace. But eventually, Greg reached over and took my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a jolt through me. "You're really here," he said softly. "Not just as my nephew or the kid I used to babysit." "Yeah," I replied, squeezing his hand. "I'm here." We stayed out on the lake for a while, the boat drifting lazily as we talked about everything and nothing. I found myself opening up even more, about fears, hopes, the kind of relationship I wanted but had never found. Greg listened intently, making me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected from him. Later, back on shore, we shared a quiet dinner of grilled fish and roasted veggies. The fire crackled, shadows dancing on our faces as the stars came out. Greg reached over and brushed a stray lock of hair from my forehead, his touch gentle. "I'm glad you came on this trip," he said. "I know it's complicated, but I want to figure it out, with you." I smiled, heart pounding. "Me too." But despite the warmth between us, I couldn't ignore the knot of worry growing in my stomach. What about my parents? What about the rest of the family? Could this really work without tearing everything apart? That night, as I lay in the tent, I stared up at the nylon ceiling, thoughts swirling. Greg was asleep beside me, his steady breathing a comfort. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, judgment, maybe even rejection. But maybe that was okay. Maybe love was messy and complicated, and sometimes it came from the most unexpected places. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds of the forest lull me to sleep, ready to face whatever came next, with Greg by my side. Morning came with that familiar chorus of birdsong and the smell of damp earth, but I woke up feeling less certain than the night before. Greg was already gone when I unzipped the tent flap. His absence was strange, even though I knew he'd probably gone to get coffee or something. I grabbed my jacket and headed toward the fire pit, expecting to find him there like the day before. Instead, I found a note, folded neatly on the cooler. "Hey, I had to get out for a bit and think. Last night was a lot. All good, but a lot. I don't want to mess this up or hurt you. I'm figuring out how to be honest with myself as much as with you. I'll be back soon." "Don't worry." Greggy folded the note back up, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. The honesty was refreshing, but the uncertainty was hard to ignore. By the time Greg returned, his cheeks were flushed from the cold morning air, and his eyes had that slightly restless look I'd seen before when he was wrestling with something inside. "Sorry about that," he said, handing me a steaming cup of coffee. "Needed a minute alone." I nodded, taking a sip. "I get it." For a while, we sat in silence, watching the smoke curl from the fire pit. Then Greg cleared his throat. "So, this is weird, right?" "Yeah," I admitted, but in a good way. He smiled, but there was still a tension in his jaw. "I've been thinking about what this means. For us, for the family. I don't want to be selfish, but I also don't want to lose what we're starting. I'm scared too," I confessed. "I don't know how Mom and Dad would take this. Or my cousins. It's complicated." Greg nodded. "It is. But maybe we don't have to figure it all out today. Maybe we just take it one step at a time." That felt like a relief. No need to rush the conversation about how to tell the family. No need to predict every outcome. Just focus on us right now. Over the next day, we kept that balance. Normal camping stuff mixed with moments that felt charged with new meaning. We built a shelter to protect us from the forecast rain, cooked meals side by side, and laughed over Greg's terrible attempts at fishing. At night, we fell into easy conversation, sharing stories from our pasts and, surprisingly, dreams for the future. One evening, as we sat around the fire, Greg looked at me carefully. I always thought I had this figured out. Who I was, what I wanted. Turns out, I was mostly fooling myself. I looked back, feeling the weight of his words. Me too. He reached out and took my hand again, his grip steady. Maybe being honest is the hardest thing of all, but also the most freeing. I squeezed his hand, feeling that same mix of hope and nervousness. Later, as the rain finally started to patter against the tent, we curled up close, the world outside feeling distant and unimportant. I realized that whatever came next, this trip had already changed me. It was the start of something new, a connection that defied expectations and challenged what I thought was possible. But with that change came questions I wasn't ready to answer. How would we navigate the fallout from our families? What would people say? Could we really cross the line from family to something else without breaking everything? I pushed those thoughts aside for now. For tonight, I would just focus on the warmth beside me, the steady presence of Greg's breath, and the quiet promise that maybe, just maybe, comfort could come from the most unexpected places. The rain kept us locked in the tent the next morning, the steady drumming on the fabric making it impossible to ignore just how cozy and close we had become. Greg was sitting cross-legged beside me, sipping whatever questionable instant coffee he'd managed to make on the camp stove. His hair was still damp and sticking up in all directions, and I caught myself thinking how, for all his rough edges, there was something genuinely endearing about him in that moment. So, he said, breaking the silence, "What's the plan when we get back to civilization?" I shrugged, not really sure how to answer. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to pretend this never happened, go back to the usual charade. But another part, I want to see where this goes. Greg nodded slowly, looking like he was wrestling with the same uncertainty. Yeah, the usual charade is exhausting, but the where this goes part, terrifying. We both laughed, the tension easing a bit, but then he got serious again. Have you thought about telling anyone? Your friends? Your parents? I shook my head. I haven't even told my closest friends about this part. And my parents? I don't even want to imagine their reaction. Greg sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mine, too. My sister would flip. I don't know how my parents would take it either. It was one of those moments where the weight of reality presses in. We were navigating uncharted waters, not just emotionally but socially. This wasn't a storybook romance. It was complicated, messy, and full of potential landmines. I guess, I said slowly, we take it slow. We figure out what this means for us before we worry about everyone else. Greg smiled, that same warm, goofy smile that had been my comfort since I was a kid. Agreed. One step at a time. After a while, the rain eased and we decided to venture out for a walk. The forest was transformed after the downpour. Everything smelled fresher, the leaves glistening with droplets, the ground soft and muddy beneath our boots. We didn't say much, just enjoyed the quiet. But then Greg suddenly stopped and turned toward me. I never thought I'd find this kind of connection with my nephew, he said quietly. I laughed. Yeah, me either. He reached out and brushed a wet strand of hair from my face. It's strange, but it feels right. We just have to be brave enough to face what comes next. That was the thing. Bravery. Not just about admitting feelings, but about facing the consequences, whatever they might be. Back at camp, as we started packing up, Greg pulled me aside. Hey, he said, voice a little hesitant. Before we head back, can I ask you something? Sure, I replied, curious. Do you want to, try being more than just family? Like, see if this can really work? I looked at him, the question hanging between us. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, but the other part hesitated, wary of how tangled things could get. I want that, I said finally, but I'm scared it could all fall apart. Greg took both my hands in his, steady and reassuring. Me too, but maybe the risk is worth it. We left the campsite with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The city looming ahead felt a little less intimidating, knowing we were facing it together. Over the next few days, we kept things mostly under wraps, careful not to raise suspicion. But the way we looked at each other, the small touches and lingering glances, they spoke volumes. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Greg and I found ourselves alone in the living room. The silence stretched before he finally spoke. How do we even start explaining this to people? I sighed. I don't know. Maybe we don't have to explain everything all at once. Maybe we just live it and let people figure it out. Greg nodded, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Yeah, living it. I like that. We sat there side by side, knowing that the road ahead was uncertain, but feeling a quiet strength in the fact that we were no longer walking it alone. The camping trip had been more than just a getaway. It was the beginning of a story I never expected to be part of, but one I was starting to believe in, and somehow, that made all the difference. Back in the city, everything felt different. The familiar streets, the honking cars, the never-ending buzz of people, it was all the same, but somehow heavier. Like the secret we were carrying between us made the air thicker. Greg and I had agreed to keep our feelings mostly between us for now, but the tension was impossible to hide. The first few days after the trip were awkward in a way I hadn't expected. Greg slipped easily back into his Uncle Greg role around my parents, cracking jokes and being loud, but every now and then, I caught a look between us, something unspoken, a silent acknowledgement that what we'd started wasn't exactly normal. I wasn't sure how to process it. One evening, a few days after we got home, Greg invited me over to his place under the pretense of watching some classic movies. I arrived to find pizza boxes scattered on the coffee table, and him sprawled on the couch in a way that still somehow seemed casual. We settled in, the TV flickering with an old black and white film, but neither of us really paying attention. I was too caught up in the way the room felt charged, like we were both waiting for something, but neither wanted to be the first to say it. Finally, Greg broke the silence. You know, camping was a lot, but I don't regret a second of it, even the messy parts. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. Me neither. He shifted closer, just enough that our shoulders touched. It was a small thing, but it sent a jolt through me. So what now? He asked, voice low. I hesitated. I guess it depends. Are you ready for this? For us? Greg looked at me, serious for once. I don't know if I'm ready for everything, but I'm ready to try. With you. That was all I needed to hear. We leaned into each other, that first tentative kiss electric and full of promise. It was awkward and sweet, like two people who had known each other forever but were learning something new all at once. But as much as that moment felt right, the reality outside the walls of Greg's apartment loomed large. How would our families react? What would people say? And more importantly, could we keep this from fracturing the relationships that meant the most? Over the next few weeks, we navigated the tricky balance between secrecy and honesty. We met up under the guise of family visits, took long walks in the park when no one was around, and shared quiet dinners where the conversation danced around the elephant in the room. One afternoon, while we were sitting in a cafe, Greg sighed heavily. I hate hiding this, he admitted. Feels like we're living in some kind of limbo. I nodded in agreement. It's exhausting, but maybe it's better this way for now. He looked at me, conflicted. I want to tell them. Just get it out there. But I don't want to hurt anyone or cause a family mess. I get that, I said softly. Maybe we take it slow. Gauge how they might react. We agreed to test the waters carefully, starting with my closest friends. One evening, over drinks with two of my best buddies, I took a deep breath and told them about Greg and me. Their reactions were better than I expected, supportive, even excited for me in a way that made my chest ache with relief. When I told Greg later, his smile was genuine and wide. See? Maybe it's not as scary as we think. But then came the harder part, telling our families. One weekend, we invited my parents over for dinner, just the four of us. The conversation was pleasant, but cautious, like everyone was sensing something unsaid. After dessert, Greg cleared his throat. "There's something I need to say," he began, voice steady but vulnerable. "I know this might be unexpected, but I care about your son more than just family." My parents exchanged glances, surprise flickering in their eyes. My mom was the first to speak. "Greg, this is a lot." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to be honest. We're figuring things out, and I hope you can accept that." There was silence, then my dad nodded slowly. "It'll take some time," he said, "but family is family. We just want you both to be happy." I felt a rush of gratitude and disbelief. Maybe it wouldn't be easy, but it was real. And with Greg by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next. That night, as we lay tangled in bed, Greg whispered, "You were right. Taking it slow was the best call." I smiled against his skin. We've got a long road ahead, but at least we're on it together. And somehow, that made all the difference. After that night with my parents, things didn't instantly become perfect, but they changed. There were awkward conversations here and there, some questions I didn't have easy answers for, and a few uncomfortable family dinners where everyone was figuring out their own feelings. But what surprised me most was how much people actually tried. My parents, while cautious, never shut us down. Greg's sister, who I thought would be the hardest to convince, called me a few days later just to ask if I was okay. It made me realize that honesty might not fix everything overnight, but it opens the door to understanding. And that was enough. Greg and I kept seeing each other, building a quiet, steady routine. A blend of family gatherings, weekend hikes, and late-night talks about everything and nothing. Our relationship wasn't a whirlwind romance or a dramatic game-changer for the family. It was something slower, more grounded. Two people who'd grown up connected in one way, now exploring a new kind of closeness as adults, with all the messiness and beauty that comes with it. One afternoon, a few months after we'd come out to everyone, Greg and I found ourselves back at the same lake where we'd first really started talking. The sun was warm on our faces, the water sparkling as it always did, and the air smelled like pine and fresh earth. We sat on a weathered bench, side by side, the kind of comfortable silence between us that only comes after a real connection. Greg nudged me gently. "You know, I never imagined this would be how it turned out." I laughed softly. "Neither did I." He looked over at me with that same goofy grin he's always had, but now there was something softer there. A quiet pride, maybe. But I'm glad it did. I'm glad we took the risk. Me too. I reached for his hand, fingers weaving through his, and felt the steady warmth that had become my anchor. "We're not perfect," I said, "and this probably isn't the easiest story anyone's heard. But it's ours." Greg nodded. "And that's what matters." We sat there a while longer, watching the ripples on the water, knowing the road ahead might have bumps, but feeling ready for them. Because sometimes, family isn't just about blood or expectations. Sometimes, it's about choosing someone over and over again, even when it's complicated. And in that moment, with the sun setting behind the trees and Greg's hand wrapped around mine, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be.